There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when the world no longer feels the same. The laughter of a crowded room sounds distant. The ambitions that once fueled you now seem hollow. And the people around you, friends, family, even those closest to you, no longer understand what you are becoming. Something inside you is shifting. You begin to see through illusions, peeling back layers of reality that others take for granted. But with every new truth revealed, something is lost. The comfort of certainty, the safety of ignorance, the sense of belonging. And then the suffering begins. Not because you are broken, not because something is wrong with you, but because transformation is never painless. This is the silent cost of awakening, one that spiritual seekers have carried for centuries. And to understand why this journey is so painful, we must first look at where suffering truly begins. Awakening is not a gentle unfolding. It is a breaking, a dismantling, a fire that burns away everything that is not real. The illusions you once lived by begin to dissolve. The roles you played, the beliefs you held, the identity you carefully constructed, it all starts to feel fragile, like sand slipping through your fingers. And with every layer stripped away, there is pain. Because the ego does not die quietly. It clings, it fights, it resists. But this suffering is not punishment. It is purification. Just as gold is refined by fire, the soul is forged through suffering. The burning away of what is false makes space for what is true. But in the midst of this transformation, it is easy to feel lost, raw, exposed, like standing in the ruins of a life that no longer fits. This is why spiritual seekers suffer. Not because they are cursed, but because they are being reshaped into something greater. And nothing is more painful than letting go of who you used to be. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when you realize you are no longer the person you once were. The dreams that once drove you feel empty. The conversations that once excited you now seem shallow. The people who once felt like home now feel like strangers. It is as if the ground beneath you has disappeared, and you are left standing in the unknown. This is the death of identity, the shedding of the old self. Like a snake forced to shed its skin, you cannot stay where you are. The tighter you cling to your past self, the more unbearable the suffering becomes. But letting go is terrifying, because for a moment, you are nothing. A void, an empty space where the old has died, but the new has yet to emerge. And in this emptiness, isolation creeps in. The world no longer recognizes you, and you no longer recognize yourself. But this is not the end. It is the necessary unraveling before rebirth. Because when the old self dies, something else awakens, a deeper sensitivity to the world itself. The deeper you awaken, the more you feel, and not just your own emotions. You walk through a crowd and sense the unspoken grief behind forced smiles. You hear the weight in someone's voice, even when their words say, "I'm fine." News of suffering, injustice, or war doesn't just disturb you, it cuts into you, as if it were happening inside your own soul. This is the burden of heightened sensitivity. As your consciousness expands, so does your connection to the collective. The sadness of the world becomes your sadness. The pain of strangers feels as real as your own, and with no way to turn it off, it can become overwhelming, draining you mentally, emotionally, even physically. Your nervous system is no longer just processing your reality. It is absorbing the emotions of everything and everyone around you. This can manifest as exhaustion, anxiety, unexplainable sadness, even physical aches and pains. Some call it empathy. But for spiritual seekers, it is an initiation, because only those who deeply feel can truly understand. And to understand suffering is to eventually face its darkest form, the dark night of the soul. There comes a point in the spiritual journey where everything collapses. The beliefs that once gave you comfort feel empty. The practices that once brought you peace feel meaningless. Even the divine, whatever form you once knew it, feels absent. This is the dark night of the soul, a term first described by the mystic Saint John of the Cross. It is not just sadness, it is not just doubt. It is a profound spiritual emptiness, a complete dissolving of the self. You may feel abandoned, disconnected from life itself. The things that once mattered seem trivial. The world continues on, but inside, you are falling into a void with no bottom. And in that silence, the mind screams, "Who am I? Why am I here? Does any of this even matter?" But this darkness is not a punishment. It is a rite of passage. Just as the seed must break to grow, just as the caterpillar must dissolve to become the butterfly, the soul must be stripped of all illusion before it can be reborn. And when that rebirth begins, you realize something else. You no longer belong where you once did. Spiritual awakening is not just an internal transformation. It changes your entire relationship with the world. The conversations that once excited you now feel shallow. The ambitions that once drove you now seem meaningless. The people around you, friends, family, co-workers, remain the same, but you are no longer who you used to be. And so, one by one, old relationships begin to dissolve. Not out of anger, not out of rejection, but because the gap between you and them has become too wide to cross. This is the loneliness of awakening, the realization that few will ever understand the path you now walk. You become like the lone wolf, forced to wander alone, searching for something you cannot yet name. The solitude is painful, but in it, you grow stronger. Because those who walk this path must first learn to stand on their own. Yet just as you begin to make peace with this isolation, something else happens. You start to feel something bigger than yourself, something you never noticed before. At some point, the pain stops being just yours. You begin to feel the suffering of the world itself. It's not just sadness. It's not just empathy. It's an energetic weight, an unshakable grief for things you have never personally experienced. War, poverty, injustice, cruelty. Even if you turn off the news, you still feel it. A silent ache pressing against your chest. This is the burden of an awakened soul. The deeper your awareness, the more you become connected to the collective pain of humanity. It moves through you, as if your spirit is trying to transmute the suffering of the world. You may wake up feeling drained, exhausted, or emotionally heavy without knowing why. This is not a sign of weakness. It is energetic empathy, the ability to feel the suffering that others ignore. And it's overwhelming, carrying the weight of the unseen, the unheard, the forgotten. But this burden is part of the journey, because to awaken is to see what most refuse to see, and once you see, you can never unsee. This is where the next layer of suffering begins, the collapse of everything you once believed. One of the greatest pains of spiritual awakening is unlearning. Everything you once believed, the truths you built your life upon, begin to crack. The world is not what you thought it was. Society is not what it seems. Even your own identity feels like a carefully constructed illusion. And when the illusion collapses, what is left? This is the terrifying moment when spiritual seekers stand at the edge of the abyss, looking down into the unknown. Nothing familiar, nothing certain, just an endless open void where the old world has vanished and the new one has yet to appear. Fear grips the mind, Doubt whispers, "What if I was better off asleep? What if this path leads to nothing?" But once the veil is lifted, it can never be put back. You can no longer unknow what has been revealed. The only way is forward. And yet, this is where many struggle the most, not because the journey is impossible, but because part of them refuses to let go. The greatest suffering of all is resistance. The soul calls for transformation. The ego fights to survive. One seeks expansion, the other clings to control. And caught between them is you, pulled in both directions, trapped in an invisible war. Like a butterfly in a cocoon, the process of change is painful. The shell of the old self tightens, suffocating. But breaking free feels just as terrifying, because what lies beyond is unknown. So you resist. You cling to comfort. You hesitate, hoping to pause the inevitable. But the truth is, the more you resist, the more you suffer. Growth demands surrender, and surrender feels like death. But it is not the death of you, only of who you once were. The moment you stop fighting the process, the pain transforms. Because suffering is never the end of the journey. It is the force that shapes you into something greater. And in the ashes of everything you've lost, you finally see why it was necessary. Suffering feels like destruction, but what if it's transformation? In every tradition, trials create growth. Fire purifies gold. Storms shape mountains. Seeds must break to grow. The soul follows the same path. Hardship is not meaningless. It strips away illusions, revealing wisdom and resilience. Like the lotus, blooming only in the mud, awakening comes through struggle. And as you emerge, you realize, this pain was never just yours. Those who endure suffering gain the strength to guide others through it. Because true healing begins when we help others find their way. Eckhart Tolle, Carl Jung, and spiritual masters agree. Suffering is the gateway to transformation. It strips away illusion, dissolves the ego, and reveals the true self. Without suffering, there is no awakening, no depth, no wisdom. It is not a curse. It is the path itself.